Hey folks, welcome back to Eddie the Thinker. My name is Aditya, aka Eddie, and today we are going to talk about obedience. But first, obedience is a form of compliance that usually occur when people follow direct commands from someone in a position of authority. Now, from a young age, we are taught to obey our parents, our elders, our teachers, the police, the government, but obedience can have tragic consequences. This is Hannah Arendt. She was a philosopher who was interested in understanding the causes of the Holocaust. She covered the trial of Adolf Eichmann, a Nazi official who was the architect of the Holocaust. Arendt concluded that he was not a bloodthirsty monster, but rather a common bureaucrat who did what he was told without questioning his orders. Now, this is not an excuse to defend Adolf Eichmann or the Khmer Rouge or the terrorists, but could it be true? Are they ordinary people exposed to extraordinary social influence? Well, say hello to Stanley Milgram. Milgram's experiment, now a classic experiment, aimed to determine the extent to which ordinary citizens were willing to go while following orders from an authority figure. More specifically, he wanted to identify the factors that led people to follow commands that violated their ethics, like punishing an innocent stranger. The participants were recruited through newspaper advertisements and direct mail solicitations to participate in a study at Yale University. A total of 40 men from various walks of life between the ages of 20 and 50 from the local community were recruited. At the laboratory, the participant was greeted by an experimenter and a 47-year-old man. The experimenter explains that the purpose of the study is to examine the effects of punishment on learning. He also explains that one of the participants would be playing the role of teacher and the other the role of learner. Upon drawing a slip of paper, the participant is assigned the role of teacher and the 47-year-old man is the learner.
Would you open those and tell me which of you is which, please? Teacher. Learner.
The teacher reads a list of word pairs and then tests the learner on his memory. The experimenter instructs the teacher to deliver an electric shock to the learner whenever he makes a mistake, starting at 15 volts and increased by 15 volts for every subsequent mistake. The shock generator has 30 switches that would deliver shocks between 15 volts and 450 volts in 15 volt increments. There were warning labels accompanying the switches, starting from slight shock to danger, severe shock to XXX. In the adjacent room, the learner is strapped into a chair and electrodes are attached to his arm. Just so that the teacher knows what the shock feels like, the experimenter gives the teacher a sample shock of 45 volts. Needless to say, it is painful. The experimenter assures that although painful, the shocks would not cause tissue damage. The test begins. The learner gets the first few word pairs right, and then he starts getting them wrong. And as instructed, the teacher administers a shock each time.
90 volts. Wrong. Volts. 135. Answer woman.
Based on the sample shock he received, the teacher is understandably concerned as he administers more severe shocks. The learner too protests. Initially, it's just screaming in pain. Later on, he reveals he has a heart condition and then he starts asking if he can get out of the experiment. Whenever the teacher wanted to stop the experiment out of concern for the learner, the experimenter would respond with one of 4 prods. Please continue, or please go on. The experiment requires that you continue. It's absolutely essential that you continue. You have no other choice, you must go on. The experimenter would use these prods in sequence in order to achieve obedience. Now, how many participants, or should I say how many teachers, do you think obeyed the experimenter and continued punishing the learner all the way up to 450 volts? The results may surprise you. Milgram hypothesized that less than 1% of the participants would go extreme. Well, it turns out that most of the participants succumb to the pressures of the authority figure, who in this case was the experimenter. The average maximum shock delivered was 360 volts. 80% of the participants continued giving shocks even after the learner mentioned that he had a heart condition. No teacher stopped administering the shocks until 300 volts. After that, you start seeing some teachers decide to not continue with the experiment. Of the 40 teachers, 26 obeyed the orders and proceeded to punish the learner with 450 volts. That's 65% of the participants. A point to be noted is that the obedient teachers were under extreme stress and were reluctant to administer shocks beyond 300 volts. Yet they obeyed.
Can't stand it. I'm not going to kill that man. You hear him hollering?
As I said before, the shocks may be painful, but they're not dangerous.
They're hollering. He can't stand it. What if something happens to him?
The experiment requires that you continue teaching.
Yeah, but I'm not going to get that man sick in there. I mean, he's hollering in there.
Only 14 of the 40 subjects defied the experimenter before the full series of shocks were administered.
It is essential that you continue the experiment.
No, it isn't essential. Not one bit.
You got no other choice, teacher.
Oh, I have a lot of choices. My number one choice is that I wouldn't go on if I thought he was being fine.
Now, I'm sure you're wondering why on earth would anyone volunteer to be shocked, or should I say electrocuted? I'm sure it's not worth the money. Well, the good news is the learner was not shocked or electrocuted because he was a Confederate. And that shock machine, that was just a dummy, it didn't shock anyone.
The victim was an accomplice of the experimenter. The drawing was rigged so that the naive subject was always the teacher and the accomplice always became the learner.
You see, in science, we need to get an approval from the ethics board before conducting an experiment. Be assured, the ethics board will not approve any experiment if it causes physical or psychological harm or have lasting effects on the participant. Now, as per the ethics board, the participant must be briefed about the deception after the experiment, and the experimenters will take the participants' consent again. The participants were originally recruited for a study on the effects of punishment on learning. This deception had to be used because if we were to reveal the true intent of the study, then the participants might behave a certain way, which is not what we want. So to avoid all that, we use deception. And I know, I can hear your sighs of relief. It's okay, everybody was okay. Take a deep breath. Now, going back to our results, Milgram argued that strong pressure coming from an authority figure can make decent people do indecent things. Now, applying this to the Nazi war crimes, he concluded that given the right circumstances, anyone would obey orders to inflict harm on innocent people. Milgram went on to conduct another 19 variations of this experiment in order to find factors that influence the participants' obedience. In one variation, he moved the study away from Yale University and into an office building. There was a decrease in obedience. About 48% of all subjects administered all the shocks. When the learner was put in the same room as the teachers, 40% of the participants administered the full series of shocks. In another variation, the authority figure, the experimenter, was called away and the orders were given by an ordinary person, said to be another participant. The obedience dropped to 20%. If there was an accomplice to the participant that accepted the experimenter's orders to continue with the experiment, the obedience was improved. But if the accomplice objected to the experimenter's orders and supported the learner's objection, obedience declined to just 10%. Women were not so different than men. Around 60% of all participants administered the full series of shocks. Milgram's studies demonstrated that the power of the situation can influence the individual's obedience. Now folks, obedience is not a bad thing. I mean, can you imagine how the roads would be if nobody obeyed the traffic laws? Actually, wait. Alright folks, that's our episode for today. I hope you had fun. This is one of those classic experiments. I mean, every introductory course to psychology has it, and it's so fascinating. It's amazing how they managed to study such a abstract concept like obedience. Well, let me know what you would do if you were in the experiment. Would you have gone ahead and punished the learner? Or would you have said, nope, I'm not doing it, I'm not harming another innocent soul? Let me know in the comment section below. I'll be back real soon with another episode. Until then, take care.